There we go. Okay, cool. So we're gonna go into writing mode. Let's put writing mode on. Boom. And make that a little wider. Sorry, adjusting the window too wide. Okay, a little bigger. There we go, almost perfect. Perfect. Perfection. Yes. Okay, cool. So it's gonna like perfectly fit now. Okay, so today we're gonna talk about random sampling. Wait, do you need something from me? Oh no. My daughter was there. She has like a little what's the word?
Whiteboard.
Yeah, she has a whiteboard, and I like saw her just standing there, and I was wondering like, is she gonna like, is she like writing me a message? So I just like, she's like right over there behind the computer, and I'm just like looking at her like she's there like furiously writing on the whiteboard. I thought she was gonna like turn it around and like say something to me. So I was like just sort of like trailing off, like thinking like, oh my god, what's happening here? Okay, so back to this. Okay, so one of the things that we've talked about is that one of the reasons that you want random sampling is to reduce what? Like, what does random sampling keep from happening? You got a special name for it. Excellent, cool. Yes, it reduces bias. So, randomly choosing people reduces bias. Now, I had a nice way of saying what's bias. So, like, what is bias? How would you describe it? It's like, yeah, what does it mean for the sample to be biased, or the group of people you're looking at and it's biased? Yeah, so a sample is biased when when the results are more a reflection of the people in the sample as opposed to whatever you're testing. And you said something very, very close to that, but I figured I would just put it here, to remind everyone. Like that's what we're worried about here. We're saying like, if I test a vaccine, I don't want like the results to be more about the people that I'm testing on, as opposed to like whether the vaccine actually works. Right? And this happens, and we're gonna like talk about some like famous historical cases where this like has actually happened. Okay. So let's just start with like an example of that, like this bias that occurs. Oh, there we go. People are camming up. Cool, cool, cool. Thank you. Makes me feel a little less alone. Oh my gosh, I have to show you. I found this hilarious meme. Let me find it. Because it like completely reflects what I'm feeling. Has everyone seen like the buff Doge meme and then like the little Doge meme where it's like, eh? Does everyone know that meme? It's like the Doge face with like a big beefy body, and then there's like the little like sad Doge on the side. Yeah. So like I found this one, and it was like, you know how that's usually like something then versus something now? So let me see if I can find it. It was like teachers then versus teachers now. And I saw it and I was like, this isn't a personal attack on like I felt like personally attacked by it. So let me see if I can find it. I have it on my phone, but I like want to like, oh my god, I have to open this. Because I was like, holy shit, that's my life. Where is it? I have to show this to you. It was so real. How do you go to your archive on Instagram? Like to see like the old posts? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like how there's like the stories? Yeah, okay. Oh, your activity. Oh, my archive, cool. Thank you so much. Okay. Oh god. Okay, so let me I'm gonna have to take a screenshot of this, message it to myself, and then share my screen. It's the only way. Oh, actually, no. I could share my phone. I forgot about this. Can we share iPhone via AirPlay? Oh my god. Okay. Screen mirroring. There we go. Okay. You should see this. Okay, do you see it? Teachers then, I demand the utmost respect from all my students. Teachers now. And you see how he has like the little gaming thing, you know, like the mic and the headphones. Hello, is anyone there? Someone please say something. And I saw this and I was like, that is my life now. I felt so sad because I realized like I was the sad, pathetic Doge, not like the beefy Doge. It's me, you know. I always say like, people are camming up. I don't like, you know, I can actually see people. Oh, is anyone there? And I find myself saying that too much in some of my classes where no one cams up. I'm like, is anyone actually hearing this? Am I just like talking out loud and like no one's ever gonna hear it? So yeah, I saw this and I was like, I feel personally attacked by this meme. Okay, so yeah. I saved it and everything. I was like, holy crap. This is too real. Okay, so back to this. It's always awkward waiting for everyone to type their responses. Yeah, it is. I like wait and I'm like, because I know like, yeah, I see people and it's like, I know you're writing and then I see people like go and I can see them get their keyboard and they like tab or open the chat and then like, oh, okay, there's responses like 20 seconds later. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard being the sad Doge. Life sucks. As the sad Doge, not the beefy Doge. Does the beefy Doge have a name? Is it like, do you know what I mean when I say like beefy Doge? I think it's spelled Doge like that. I don't remember if it has two G's or not. But anyways, now we're going to talk about something a little less interesting. Okay, we're going to go back in time to the 1930s. Oops, it's not working for me. Okay, example. Come on, type. Okay. Jesus. Okay. There we go. Sometimes it is so hard to do things. So, the time is the 1930s. So this is like the Great Depression, right? Does anyone remember who the president was in the 20s and 30s? Or the 30s? Who was El Presidente? Say that again? Yeah, it was Roosevelt. Okay, cool. Yeah, the time is the 30s. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was president, which we'll just call him FDR. Okay, now before he became president, he had to win, right? So, what happens, like, what's the process where people choose who's going to be, like, the person who runs for, like, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party? So what do we call that? Yeah, cool, good. So at some point, FDR had to win the primary. So I think he's a Democrat. Let's just say he's a Democrat. So there was the Democratic Party primary. And there were two people running. One of them was FDR. Oof, and I forget the name of the other guy. He had like a very white person name. Let's just call him Calvin. Let's just say FDR and Calvin. I know Calvin is not his real name, but we're just going to say that. Okay. And FDR ended up being pretty famous because, like, he was very liberal. Okay, so, like, he's founded he, like, started a bunch of stuff where it's, like, you know how, like, a bunch of people are unemployed right now? So, like, during the Great Depression, like, the government, like, hired a bunch of people to do things like build roads and, like, make parks and, like, just, like, clean stuff. It was called the Civilian Conservation Corps. And, like, they created things like unemployment and, like, you know, a lot of, like, Social Security was invented at the time. It was called the New Deal. Does everyone sort of vaguely remember this from history class, the New Deal? There's, like, a bunch of social reforms that happened. So anyways, like, he's pretty liberal because he came up with it. This guy, however, was pretty conservative. So, like, for our purposes, what we really care about is that FDR was a liberal person and this Calvin dude was a conservative person. Okay, now, generally, what sort of people are more likely to vote for conservatives? Okay, older people, also what else? Like, who have a lot to benefit other than older people from conservative yeah, the rich, thank you so much. The rich usually own businesses, and like conservative policies generally like benefit business owners, right? Whereas like New Deal policies, like if you're poor, that's probably, you know, someone you want to vote for. So anyways, like the Democratic Party was going through some changes at the time, and there were two candidates. One of them was sort of a more liberal candidate who appealed to the poor, and the other was a more conservative candidate who appealed to the older, richer people. This is like a tale as old as time in America. So like, you know, this happened to us recently, right? So like, this should be sort of familiar. This happens in America like all the time, like even though this was like almost 100 years ago. So anyways, there were these two candidates, and people were wondering like, well, who is the more likely candidate to win the primary? All right, does that make sense? Like, you're wondering, like, well, there's these two people, like, you're guessing, you're wondering, like, who do we think is going to win? Now, what's sort of cool about this is that eventually, how do you actually decide who wins the primary? Like, what is that process called? Like, what happens? How do we actually decide who wins the primary? Burrito, stop. Yeah. People vote, right? Yeah, exactly. So we look at the popular vote. We're like, okay, how do you figure out? So to actually win the primary, there's like a vote that happens. And the thing is, everybody gets to vote. And instead of saying everybody from now on, I'm going to call it the population. And technically, it's not everybody who gets to vote. It's all of the eligible voters, right? So if I talk about the population of eligible voters, I mean all of the eligible voters, right? There's certain people who are allowed to vote, right? Like if you're over 18 and you haven't committed a felony, you can vote, right? So does it make sense if I talk about the population of voters? I mean everybody who could vote, even if they don't actually vote. Now, if you wanted to figure out who was going to win, you could literally just like do your own vote ahead of time and see what people do, right? But that's like a real pain. Does that make sense? Like if there's like going to be like a couple 100 million people who are going to vote, you're probably not going to be able to like get all those people to tell you before the actual voting day who they're going to vote for, right? That's difficult to do. Does everyone get that idea that like there's no point in trying to just ask everybody ahead of time if you're trying to make a prediction? So instead of asking everybody, what will you do instead? If you want to like get some good information about who's going to win. So instead of asking everybody, what would like the alternative be? Exactly, cool. So instead of dealing with the population, which is everybody, you would only ask a sample of people. In other words, some of them. Some, not all. And this is a very common thing in statistics. You want to make a statement about the population, but you don't want to have to ask everybody, so instead you look at a sample. That's what a vaccine trial is, right? You don't give the vaccine to everybody, you give it to some people and you see if it works. What's this called in politics, where you ask some people who they're going to vote for to try to predict the outcome? Yeah, polling, cool. This time period was the invention of modern polling. We still haven't like figured it out how to do it perfectly yet, because there's a variety of issues. So, bad polls, what do they suffer from? So we talked about this earlier. Like there's some issues with your sample sometimes. Your sample might have what? Yeah, exactly. So the problem is that like your sample might suffer from some sort of bias. So ideally you would have a random sample, right? That's the whole point of we said like you don't want it to reflect the people you chose. You want it to reflect what you need it to actually reflect. Bias is you have a biased sample when it's like there's an error to it. So we're going to talk about a famous example where the poll was very biased. and like weird shit happened. Okay, so some people had some idea. Like, we want to predict who's going to win. And the company that wanted to do this was called the Literary Digest. So the Literary Digest, which was a magazine at the time, conducted a poll to try to figure out who was going to win the primary. And what they did was they basically sent out in their magazine like a little thing that said, hey, you know, like, I don't know, people probably may not read magazines anymore, but sometimes, like, in magazines, there's these, like, little pieces of paper that they're perforated so you can pull them out, and it's, like, a little note card that you can fill in and, like, mail back to the people. Does that, like, vaguely make sense what I'm talking about? Like, in the magazine, they attached a little thing, you fill it out, and then you send back your response. So they included a poll, and they got something like 20,000 results. Actually, probably more. Maybe like 50,000. Does everyone agree that basically getting 50,000 responses is like pretty good? Like, you'd be like, oh man, I have some like pretty serious data here. They even did something else. They also went out of their way and telephoned people, and they found them by looking up telephone numbers and car registrations for people who were not, like, subscribed to the magazine. So, like, they tried really hard to get, like, a lot of information from a lot of people. Like, they basically, they sent, like, every magazine had this little thing, like, who are you gonna vote for, FDR or Calvin? And then they went and they looked up a bunch of telephone numbers for people by looking at telephone numbers like phone books. This actually existed back then. And car registrations, and just calling those people and asking them like, hey, we found your number. We're just curious who you're going to vote for. Okay, I'm going to let you write that down. Just one second. I'm going to step away. Okay, I'm back. Okay, so they did this poll, and the results were interesting. So I'm going to make up these numbers because I don't remember exactly what the real results were, but this is like pretty close. So the results were something like, for FDR, like 37% of people said they were going to vote for him. But for Calvin, again, made up name, I don't remember exactly who it was. What does that leave over? Like 63%? So in other words, according to the poll, overwhelmingly, it looked like the other guy was going to win, not FDR. But what do we know from history? Like, what actually happened? Oh, it was Herbert Hoover? Nice. So I was thinking of Calvin Coolidge, probably. So who actually won? Like, from history, we know who actually won. Right. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, because Herbert Hoover, I think, was from his, like, earlier attempt. Thank you. Landon. Sweet. I was like, it's something. Landon. It sounds like a very white man name. Let's just say that. Yeah, from Kansas. So, like, the actual results basically were flipped. Like, if you went and looked at, like, what actually ended up happening, you know, like, basically, it was, like, almost completely wrong. And you start wondering, like, why and how did this happen? Like, how could it have been so wrong? So how could it have been so wrong? Like, they asked so many people, right? They ended up asking like 50 to 100,000 people. Like, if you ask all these different people, huge numbers, why was their prediction so wrong? So we know that definitely it's because there was some sort of bias going on. And statisticians became very interested with this, and they started studying bias more and more and trying to figure out, like, well, is there any way we could figure out if we're going to be biased, and how would we fix this problem? And they did basically a post-mortem, like, where did we go wrong? What exactly led to this weird outcome that, like, was wrong? And looking back, it actually makes a lot of sense that they were very wrong on this. Because, first of all, what sort of people do you think subscribe to Literary Digest? Like, just from the name itself. Yeah, I mean, you have to be someone who's like, oh man, I like reading about literature. So maybe you're old, maybe you're educated, you have enough money to afford a magazine subscription, right? So like right away you're like skewing towards a certain group of people, right? The fact that they ask people who subscribe to their magazine means that they're only asking people, like, does it make sense? A lot of people don't subscribe to Literary Digest, right? So apparently the people who subscribe to Literary Digest were more likely to be fans of Landon than like the general population. Also, who are the other people they contacted other than their own subscribers? Like, what was the list that I gave you? It's like cars, and there was one more. Telephones. Do you know what percentage of people had cars in America and like when this was going down? Like now almost everybody does, but does anyone know what the level of car ownership was in like the 1930s? Like guesses. Nah, 5% is too low. It was more like 20-something%. It was like in the 20%. So like basically the richest 20% of people owned cars. Likewise, most people didn't have phones. So again, this didn't really help. This biased the results to people with money. Because it was only people with money that could afford to own a phone. It was only people with money who could afford to own a car. And it was generally people with money who subscribed to Literary Digest. Right? So right away, once you start thinking about it, you realize that this result was going to be biased, no matter how many people they interviewed. Because what they were capturing, in some sense, was the opinion of people who were rich, or had money, or were educated. And most people are not that. So even though they asked a lot of people, it still wasn't accurate. So when it comes to sampling, the quality of the sample is much more important than the quantity of people you ask. So it's very much a matter of quality over quantity. The fact that they asked like 100,000 people does not make up for the fact that it was biased. Okay, and this is a very important fact about sampling. Just asking more people with your biased method will not make it more accurate. And history is like riddled with cases like this, where there's like, you have some sort of biased approach to collecting your information, and just because you collect tons of information with your biased approach, like, doesn't make your results any better. Okay. So hopefully this story is sort of like setting is like painting a picture or a story as to why random sampling is going to be important. Like, if you go out and you like choose some group of people, like, oh, these are the people who subscribe to this magazine, you're going to get the opinion of the people who read that magazine, not everybody. If you make a poll on Facebook, is that reflective of everybody? No, it's just reflective of the people who are on Facebook. If you make a poll on, Snapchat or Instagram or whatever the hell you choose, that's not going to be reflective of everybody. It's going to be reflective of the particular group of people who you're reaching out to. And we're all aware of the fact that like different age groups and different socioeconomic statuses are more likely to be involved on different platforms, right? So if you choose a particular platform, you're going to have inherently biased results to whatever that group is that's more likely to be on there. Okay, so this is like a big thing. So now the question becomes, how do you get a good random sample? Like, how do you avoid bias? And we've talked about that a little. And you do that by random sampling. Oh, yeah? Yeah, sure. It's okay. There you go. Okay, we'll just leave it there for a moment. Okay, can I scroll down now? Okay, cool. So now you start wondering, like, well, how do you avoid bias? Like, the answer is random sampling, but how do you actually do random sampling? So there's different ways that you can approach random sampling, and we're going to talk about them and like their benefits and their drawbacks, and just give you an idea of like how this is going to work. So like, how do you actually pull this off in practice? And it's pretty cool, actually. There's a lot of effort, time, and money that has gone into figuring out how to do this well. And it's really useful. There's a reason like people pay millions and billions of dollars for advertising. It's because they use all this to figure out like what effect the advertising has. Okay, so first of all, what you need to be able to do random sampling is that you need a list of everybody in your population. Okay? And in America, we have a particular government agency which is tasked with this purpose. Does anyone know what it is? The census, yes. The census actually maintains a list of everybody in America, and they call it the master address file, or something like that. They have a list of every single address in America that the post office can deliver to, and then they have a list of everybody who lives at that location, and they update it every 10 years. So like there's some computer everywhere that has like this list of the 360 million people who live in America, how old they are, which address they're currently living at. But the point is, to do random sampling, you need a list of everybody. Yeah, it is sort of creepy. There are a lot of laws protecting the privacy of that information. The census is like basically not allowed to share it with anyone because, yeah, it would be super creepy. Imagine someone got that list, like, it'd be nuts. Like, you know where everyone lives. First of all, like, the file would be huge, but like, if you could somehow work with it and download the whole damn thing, like, you could do all sorts of weird stuff. So they have this big list. So let's imagine that their list only has 10 people. Or actually, let's do 5. Or how many lines am I going to have here? We'll do 6. So Joyce, Ronald, Kuya Mark, Broseph. I'm just making up names. James and Tiana. Let's say that's everyone who like lives in America. 6 people. So this is your master list. Does it make sense? I'm just making up some random master list. Okay. So there's a method called the simple random sample. Does everyone hear my dog like whimpering in his sleep in the background? Oh my god, that's so creepy. He's dreaming. I see his leg kicking and he's like moaning in his sleep. So the easiest way to do this is called a simple random sample. So, yeah, it's really hilarious when dogs do that. They like dream and you see them. So the simple random sample, what it does is each subject has an equal chance of being included in the sample. That's how you pull off a simple random sample. So a simple random sample means that you go to each person and you do something like flip a coin or some other random process to determine if they're going to be in the sample. So it's only a simple random sample if each person has an equal chance of being included in the sample. So for instance, if you're flipping a coin, so here's your coin, and let's say like the way it works is that like heads, if it comes up heads, that means that you're in the sample. And if it comes up tails, that you're not in the sample. What's the chance that any given person will be included in the sample? If you're using a coin to determine this. Yeah, exactly. So does it make sense? Because each person has an equal 50% chance of being in the sample, that would be a simple random sample. So this is how simple random samples work. What you do is you have a big list of everybody, and the computer flips a coin, and it's like, this person is in, that person is out, that person is out, that person is in, that person is in, that person is out. And then those three people would be in your simple random sample. You can use percentages other than 50%. Like there's ways to make it so that like, oh, you only get 10% of them, so each person has an equal 10% chance, or whatever number you want. But like a coin, I think is like the easiest to imagine. Okay, so what are the names of the people that I've included in here? In my sample, I have Joyce, Broseph, and James. So thinking about America, what percentage of people are females and what percentage are males, approximately? Right, now looking at this, what percentage of females do I have? 30. Yeah, 33%, because you get the 1/3. And you have 66% males. Does everyone see how this doesn't really like follow the actual pattern of males and females? There is some bias, but at least my bias is random. But the fact is, you're never going to completely get rid of bias, especially with a simple random sample. So notice there is still bias. This sample is biased towards males. There are more males than females in there. But at least it's not because of like some weird thing, like because I chose people from Literary Digest or something like that. At least it's random bias. So there are other methods of random sampling that like are more complicated and will have even less bias, and that's what we're going to talk about now. The simple random sample, there will still be bias, and depending upon what you're doing, that might be an issue for you. Or it may not. Like, if we were doing a study about men and women, this is not going to work well for us because it has more men than women, and maybe we don't want that for some reason. Okay, so we're going to talk about another way of doing stuff. Actually, can I scroll down from here, or should I wait for a moment? Okay, I think it looks like I can scroll down. So there is something called stratified sampling, or stratified random sampling. Stratified random sampling is sort of like simple random sampling, but it does some stuff that makes it usually have less bias. So stratified random sampling, you use it when you need some sort of balance between groups. So like remember in the example above, I had way too many men compared to women. If you needed to have like a 50-50 split of men and women, stratified random sampling is a way to get a random sample, but to also make it so that you'll have 50% men and you'll definitely have 50% women. So like, do you get what I mean by you need some sort of balance between groups? Like this will make it so that, oh, you're definitely gonna get that. So what you do is you come up with your strata. And the strata are those groups that you need to balance. So let's say that you needed your strata could be something like gender. You look at a variable like gender. Does it make sense? Your gender variable has two values. A person could be male, or a person could be female. And then like what's another variable we can use other than gender? Cool, race, nice. And we're gonna imagine that race only has two, let's do three. There's white, Asian, and black. I don't know, whatever. I just don't want to have too many. Just imagine there's only three races. Okay. So, actually, let's just use race. Let's forget about gender. Let's make our lives easier. Let's just imagine that we only care about race. So I'm going to draw a little picture over here. This little box, that's everybody. So this is your population. And each dot is a subject. And the white dots will be white. White dots. They are white people. What color should we use for Asian? I don't want to have to choose this. Cool, purple, thank you. There's like a purpley, or I don't know what it is. These purpley dots are Asian people. Cool, there we go. Now, and then black people will be black dots. That's just easy. Okay, that doesn't show up. I can't use that color. They're gonna have to be... Shit. They're gonna be this color. It's more brown. It just doesn't show up. Okay, now imagine these dots are where people live on a map. Does this make sense that this is like my public, my master address file? I know where all the people live. Now, looking at this, what do you notice about Asian and black people in terms of like where they live? Like there's something interesting going on if you actually look at the... Yeah, we've got ethnic ghettos, all right? We have some ghettos in this place, like in the proper sense of the term, where it's like there's a group of minorities who lives there. It has less to do with money as opposed to like a group of people who live there with similar things. But if you look at white people, they're like spread out everywhere. It's not like white people are clustered somewhere. Does that make sort of sense? Does that make sense so far? You can see the white dots are like distributed everywhere equally, whereas with like black people, they're sort of like in one little clump, and sort of with Asian people, they're really densely populated in this one area. So to do a stratified sample, what you would do is you would first look at all. So you would break your list up by strata. So 1. Break your list up by strata. So you would have like 3 separate lists, i.e. a list for whites, Asians, and blacks. And then what you would do is you would take a simple random sample of each of the stratas. The stratas are your separate list by strata. So does it make sense? Your list of white people would be called the white strata. Your list of Asian people would be called the Asian strata. And you would take some fixed percentage. So what would happen is that you would make sure that 33% of your people are white, 33% of your people are Asian, and 33% of your people are black or something like that. That way you would have an equal representation of each group. Otherwise, if you were just to take a regular simple random sample, your group would predominantly look like the largest group. So let's say you wanted to do a study of the different races. Here, we'll see why this works. So let's say there's 100 people in your city. %90 of them are white, 8% are black, and 2% are other. Like, this was like America like 70 years ago, basically. Okay, so if you took a simple random sample, which you usually write as SRS. Okay, wait, something's wrong. SRS stands for simple random sample. And let's say each person had an equal 10% chance of being included. How many white people are you probably going to get in your sample? So you have 100 people to choose from and you're going to get 10% of them. So how many people do you end up with in your sample? Cool. So you're going to have 10 people. Now, of those 10 people, how many are probably going to be white? Not 8, but... So, okay, wait. There's 100 people, and you're going to choose 10% of them, which means you're going to get 10 of them. So, we know that 90% of these people are going to be white. What's 90% of 10? 9. There we go. So you're probably going to end up with 9 whites, which means how many non-white people are you going to end up with? 1 more. Now what's the problem? That one other person could be either of these categories. And in fact, which category are they probably going to be from, because that category is bigger? They're probably going to be black. Does that sort of make sense? You're probably not going to get anyone from this other category simply because that group is so small. They're probably just not going to show up in a sample that you take. So this is like the drawback of a simple random sample. If you have these small groups, they don't end up being included in your data. A stratified sample would make sure that some of those people are going to be included no matter what. A stratified sample would make sure you have white people, it would make sure you have black people, and it would make sure that you have other people. Okay, that's why we care about that. Like if you want to collect information about people of all of the different races, you need to stratify by race to make sure that you have those people in your sample. But if you don't care about something like that, the simple random sample will work fine. Okay, I'm going to let people ask questions about this. And then we're going to end soon, because they're going to come and like rip up my floor in a moment here. I was like thinking about it, I was like, I don't think I can teach while someone's like jackhammering through my floor to fix a broken pipe, you know, and I'd be like, can you hear me? So honest question, do we get the issue with this little town because the size of the other group category is so small that they might not show up in a sample and you want to make sure they show up, okay, cool. If that idea makes sense, that's all you really have to understand. Like, this is like something that people like get their PhDs in obviously, but if you get the general gist, that's what we're going for. You need to understand that like people, you know, they figure out the details. Like, you don't need to know how it works like super in detail. You just need the idea. Okay, so we're gonna end the class then. I hope you have a good rest of the day, okay? Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. Bye. Hello? Yes, this is he.